Welcome to the premiere and the pilot of the first no-fly TV show, Climate Action News, brought to you by We Don't Have Time, the social media platform for climate action, in collaboration with Plan International, Our Kids Climate, Earth Day Network, Climate for Connection for Climate, and the Club of Rome. My name is Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson, and I am the Climate Action News host. This show is all about climate action and solutions, and please stay with us online throughout the show because afterwards you'll have the possibility to chat with the experts. The theme for this pilot is sustainable finance for all it's worth, but we'll talk more about that later. Now over to our guests that are with us online here. Please welcome Jill Cubitt, co-founder of Kids Climate. We also have with us Nick Nuttall, Director of Strategic Communications, Earth Day Network. And we have with us Sandrine Dixon de Clève from Nice. She's co-president of the Club of Rome. And with us also we have Gabriela Büscher. She's global COO of Plan International. And we have also with us Scott Amix, trend analyst with us from New York, and the founder of We Don't Have Time, Ingmar Rentzog. So Jill, I'd like to start with you. Could you please give us your perspective on climate news from the parents' view?
Yes, thank you, Katarina, and thank you so much for inviting me to the show. I'm a representative of the Our Kids Climate Global Network, which is bringing groups together from around the world to protect the kids that we love from the escalating climate crisis. We first came together in Paris in 2015 at the climate negotiations and have been mostly working in our own home countries and organizing parents. In April of this year, we relaunched our global collaboration with 18 organizations from 10 countries. And what you're about to see is a clip of Gina McCarthy, who spoke at our launch. Can you show the clip? I don't think we can hear the sound. So I think for the clip, I'm happy to just tell you what the clip was about. In the clip, Gina says, we have a moral collective responsibility as well as an individual responsibility to our children, and we have to meet that at all costs. No one has more at stake when it comes to climate change than you and I, except our children. And so I think the idea here is that we know that the kids have been organizing out there through the climate strikes, and we've really witnessed an explosion of youth organizing. But we're also starting to see growing worry among parents and grandparents. And this concern or this worry is turning into action. We've seen hundreds of new parent groups under the banner of Parents for Future that have organized to support the kids, the Fridays for Future school strikers. And we've also seen new groups who have organized that are focused on communications, direct action, and policy. Sometimes these organizations have, the organizing has taken place within existing organizations like Extinction Rebellion or Sunrise Movement or 350.org. And other times it's completely new organizations. And basically what we're doing is we're calling on all parents out there to start organizing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jill Cubitt, with us from New York, from co-founder of Our Kids Climate. And Nick Nuttall, could you please give us an update from the democracy perspective? You're with us from Berlin. Let's unmute Nick. This is a new format, so there are some hiccups in the beginning. Let's hear it from Nick Nuttall. There you go.
So I'm unmuted. Thank you very much indeed. Nick Nuttall here with the Earth Day Network. It's going to be the anniversary of Earth Day. 1970 was when I suppose it was the birth of the environmental movement in terms of citizens coming out. It's now a worldwide phenomenon, but we really want to make it big in 2020 on our 50th anniversary and get at least half the world's population out with purpose to tell their leaders, whether they be leaders of government or whether they be leaders of cities and businesses, that basically we want firm action now to align the world with the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And I'm really delighted that you've chosen Climate Solutions for this new TV show. I'm really delighted that the first one is about climate finance, because we know without climate finance, we're always going to be fighting with one hand behind our back. We know there are trillions of dollars out there in the global economy, some of it now pointing into the green economy, into a climate-friendly economy, but it's still very patchy, and we still don't have the kind of scale of finance that's needed. It should be perfectly normal to invest in green infrastructure. It should be perfectly normal to invest in building the resilience of communities. It should be perfectly normal to compensate poor people for the kinds of extreme weather events that we're already seeing. And it should be perfectly normal to have insurance cover in Fiji or Tuvalu or the African countries. It's not normal right now. It's starting, but it's not fast enough. I think we have a campaign for 2020 called Vote Earth. Vote Earth is about voting in elections for people with strong climate policies. People should check out if those strong climate policies also include financing this transition. And if you're lucky enough to have a pension fund, tell them you don't want to invest in dirty energy anymore. And if you're lucky to have shares in a company, go to their meetings and vote Earth in a shareholders meeting, and tell those companies you want to transition. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nick Nuttall. Sandrine Dixon-de Clèves with us from Nice. Could you please give us an update from a policy perspective?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me on this program. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So already, if you can put up the first slide, please, and you will see that right behind me, I actually have an emergency evacuation plan. I'm in a coffee house. And what we find quite interesting at the Club of Rome, since we have been around for the last 50 years, the first to start to talk about the limits to growth, and the fact that actually we must live differently in order to share this planet equitably across all species. In the autumn, we actually shared on your show and launched our emergency plan. And we are pleased to see that now we actually have 658 jurisdictions across the globe that have adopted emergency declarations. But what we're calling upon at the Club of Rome is the fact that we have to translate these emergency declarations into action. And exactly as Nick indicated, and if you can go to the next slide, you will see that we already have declared in 4 different areas, but we have 10 key solutions where we can unpack moving towards a low carbon economy. Now, what we're seeing is that in the European Union, by 2050, we have to be net zero. And there are many other jurisdictions that have called for net zero and emergency, including the United Kingdom, France, Ireland, and even Canada. But what we just saw a few days ago was that the European Council actually blocked moving to net zero by 2050 because 4 countries voted against it. And this is where we're saying, exactly as you opened, we need the collective responsibility of all governments to put in place the policy now in the next decade that is going to enable us to actually fight this emergency. So we're not saying we can wait until 2050 to be active. We're saying that all those incredible solutions that we have, both in terms of pulling out of fossil fuels, investing in renewables, ensuring that we bring people on board, ensuring that we shift in terms of our materials and the way in which we use materials, all those solutions exist now. We don't necessarily need new technology. And I'll make my last point, which is the fact that we don't have another 50 years. I'm 53. That's my lifetime. So my call and the call of the Club of Rome and many others, including Greta Thunberg, and exactly as others have indicated, we have a collective responsibility now in the next 10 years to work together with governments to put in place the policies that will underpin our transition out of this emergency into an even better civilization. And I am incredibly confident that we can emerge from emergency much stronger and more capable of having greater well-being across all people and being much more resilient to climate change.
Thank you very much, Sandrine Dixon-de Clèves with us from Nice. Scott Amix should be with us now from New York. Scott Amix is trend analyst. His focus is on research-based product innovation and technologies. So Scott, please give us your perspective as a trend analyst on climate action, climate news.
Well, thank you for having me. This is Scott Amix with Amix Ventures. One of the things that I wrote on Forbes is a need to have product innovation to open up the capital floodgates. According to the IFC, which is a private arm of the World Bank, they've established a set of operating principles developed with fund managers and DFIs. And they're trying to harmonize the standards around impact investing, as well as lower the barriers of entry and some 60 investment groups that signed up for the new code. And collectively, they account for some $350 billion in assets managed in investment impact investing. However, the code does not necessarily guarantee that trillions will be allocated to impact investing. So what is required? What is required is a systematic market approach that enables impact-driven institutional investors to participate with minimal friction. An example of this is, though dissimilar in risk return characteristic, is really the Bitcoin. So before the Bitcoin, Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, they had difficulties where the institutional investors cannot actually participate easily into that marketplace. By having a product investment vehicle, you allow for, in particular, these groups to be able to handle the buying, the storing, the safekeeping of Bitcoins. So similarly, when you think about pension schemes, institutional investors, they all have very different set of requirements. By being able to create a product that specifically supports them so they can easily allow for them to invest is hugely important. The other aspects in terms of news is Michael Bloomberg's latest Beyond Carbon campaign that's promising to deploy about $500 million in capital. But capital is just one side of the equation. Implementation is another piece. We're still relying on 30 to 50-year-old technologies. And according to MIT's Technology Review and Bill Gates' 10 breakthrough technologies, one of those is around carbon dioxide capture or CO2 capture from the air, and do it in a way that's cost effective and scalable. So one of those interesting creation or inventions is from Joanne Corey, who's been working on this engineering method to be able to allow for plants and trees to retain more carbon by increasing the depth and the growth of the roots. So right now we release about 727 gigatons of CO2, and most of that is being captured by trees and plants, but there's still a delta. That delta can be addressed through, like I said, a suberin-rich roots that can store more CO2 and keep them sequestered underground for potentially hundreds of years, long after the plants and trees are gone. Even
That's amazing.
For example.
That's amazing. Thank you for your point of view from your trend analyst, your point of view in New York, Scott Amix. With us here in Stockholm, we have the founder of We Don't Have Time, Ingmar Renshag. And Ingmar, could you please give us your perspective on climate news from social media aspect?
Thank you, Katarina. I will share my screen and give a short presentation of what has been talked a lot about the climate crisis on internet. So I start with this picture. It's a graph published by the business magazine The Economist that's showing the disruptive way the Greenland ice actually is melting right now. It's a lot of talk about this incident, and what I think is the most interesting is that it's actually a cover story of a big economic newspaper, and more and more business magazines are actually covering the climate crisis, which is a good thing. But a graph is one thing, a picture is another thing. This picture went totally mad on internet, and it's showing the ice on Greenland melting. It's a climate scientist that is collecting data from a weather station, and instead of ice, it's a sea. And it's, as you see, it's really sunny and hot outside. So this picture went really crazy on internet. Another picture that shows the climate crisis all too well is a satellite image took last week from the 6th biggest city in India, where we see that almost all water has dried out. And this is really crucial. And actually next year, over 21 cities in India, including New Delhi, could be out of groundwater. So even more bad news that is happening through this month is the Canadian permafrost is melting 70 years before it was predicted in climate models. So the climate model is wrong with 70 years in the wrong direction. It's much better when the scientists thought. So we could think of as a good news that Canada sees this and declared a climate emergency last Monday. But I'm sorry to tell, they're not walking the talk, because the day after they approved a big oil pipeline expansion. So that was a lot of talk on internet because it's of course hypocrisy. Another person that declared a climate emergency was actually the Pope, and he didn't approve an oil pipeline. Instead, he invited the oil executives to have them act on the climate crisis. I don't know if it's so much action yet, but it's really interesting that the Catholic Church does this because they have 1.3 billion followers. Another big action is the Ende Gelände activism in Germany, where over 1,000 climate activists invaded a coal mine and stopped the production. And I think this kind of incidents and risk must be accounted for if you invest in fossil fuel assets. We were going to see probably much more of this activism, and it will cost investors money that is invested in the fossil area. One of the investors that had realized the increased risk with fossil investments is the Norwegian fund that is the biggest sovereign fund in the whole world. They actually decided to de-invest over $10 billion in June. So that's a good news, and it's also something to talk more about on this show.
Thank you very much, Ingmar Rentzhog, founder of We Don't Have Time. And with us, we also have Gabriela Büscher. She is COO of Plan International, and Plan International works a lot on girls' rights. So, Gabriela, could you please give us your perspective from a gender perspective point of view on climate use?
Thank you, Katarina. I'm very happy. Plan International is very happy to partner today and to be part of this. As an organization, we've been working more than 80 years on child rights. And in the process of working with the most vulnerable communities across the world, we really understood that the gender gap was so significant that we would not be making enough progress in development if we didn't really address that vulnerability and gap, and also the opportunity that comes with investing on girls and girls actually being change agents. But also more recently, I would say we've also understood that all our efforts in development and reducing gender inequality are at threat by climate change. And in reality, the climate crisis exacerbates the differences and the vulnerabilities and has the risk of really rolling back a lot of what we have achieved in terms of gender equality. So we are at all levels very interested in measuring this and understanding the impact. I have here the report that we launched 2 weeks ago on harnessing the power of data for gender equality. It's a gender index on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we did this in partnership with several organizations, including the Gates Foundation and KPMG. And there we see that on all aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals, we are not making enough progress on gender equality, and on climate change is one of the ones where actually there is the least. So we need to have some concerted effort on that.
Gabriela, sorry to interrupt. Could you please show up the report again, because we didn't quite see it?
Okay.
To hold it still for a little bit higher up, closer to the screen. Here we go. Thank you.
And so, you know, in our work, we work in over 50,000 communities and the most vulnerable communities in 76 countries in the world. And we have seen the effects of the climate change and climate crisis. And what we're doing is working with those communities on mitigating. And we're concerned about the intergenerational injustice that these youth and children in these communities, and particularly girls, are most affected by all the impact of climate change. And of course, they have been the least responsible in the situation, both of not being from the most developed countries and also from being themselves youth and children. So they are most affected also by these extreme weather disasters that are happening, and over 80% of displaced people are girls and women. The latest OCHA report on the humanitarian overview really focuses on the issue of the disproportionate affectation on girls and women on all these extreme weather events. There's issues of malnutrition. Already girls are the last to receive the food at the table because of gender and social norms. They will also be more at risk of abuse and exploitation in these events, and they will have less access to education. And all these issues compound themselves. So you see a girl that is unfortunately a refugee as a result of one of these extreme events, and has is abused or exploited and may be pregnant and then has less access to education and then goes into a downward spiral of vulnerability. So it's very concerning for all of us. But the other side of this is that there is also great opportunity to precisely focus on gender issues on this climate change agenda and make it an opportunity to redress the imbalance if we have all a concerted, deliberate effort on that. And given that it is a systemic disruption, and we all need to change our behavior in order to collectively address the consequences and mitigate the climate impact, then we can also at the same time change those gender norms that can make girls and women be more active leaders in that process. So we have seen already, I'll just finish with saying, we've seen that in the children's movement at the moment is the largest in history, and children are very potent change agents, and change makers. And there is great opportunity to continue and support so that more in the less privileged communities can also participate in that movement.
Thank you very much, Gabriela Büscher.
Thank you.
And now I'm moving on to a little bit of a panel talk here. All of you in your separate work fields of work are dependent on having your work financed. So what trends do you see in the flow of money when it comes into climate action work, and what needs to be done to funnel even more money from fossil devastation into more climate action? Who would like to answer this? Just put your hand up and I'll unmute you. Sandrine, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk both about finance for ourselves, but also very importantly, the capital that's out there, because I want to build on some of the other points. So the first thing is that building on the economic losses and also the losses of women and gender, let's not forget that women are the first on the front line of drowning from climate events and also flooding, because often women do not know, and girls, how to swim. So that's number one. We know that in Europe, we're going to have actually a tenfold increase to about 34 billion by century's end of costs due to weather and climate. But in addition to that, we also know that the investment gap is about 1.19 to 1.48 trillion from 2031 all the way to 2050. And in Europe in particular, this is huge in terms of transport, water and waste, and energy. So we have a huge challenge of not only getting funding for ourselves to do our work, but most importantly, getting funding to where it needs to go, both in terms of resilience and also in terms of mitigation. The last point that I will make, which is very important, is let's be very clear, 2% of green bonds are part of the bond structure. That's only 2%. And 2% of the oil and gas industry is going into green projects. So we need to remember the capital is there, but it's not going in the right direction. Final point, yesterday we launched in Europe the first technical expert group recommendations on disclosure, a taxonomy, and stress testing all of our investments. And this is huge because now investors will know what is green and what is brown. And I think that's very important in terms of ensuring that all the capital flows to the right projects.
Thank you, Sandrine. Gabriela again, and then Nick, please, and then Scott.
Thank you. Yes, so one of the very important things is to redress the balance of investment. We're investing a lot more on mitigation and less on adaptation. So we believe that it's very important to encourage more investment on that, and especially also on the least developed countries. So only 18% of global investment on climate change is coming to those least developed countries. And within all this, we have an opportunity as we move away from the fossil economy to the green economy to consider girls and young women's inclusion in the green economy, so that it's a really transformative change. So it's not in that case about more capital, but in reality making sure that we are using it in the most transformative way so that it's really a sustainable change and we don't reproduce the imbalances that brought us in the first place to this very extractive fossil economy that we're now facing the consequences of. So a lot of the solution is ensuring that there is access to education for girls, but what sort of education? So education that is going to be contributing to a green economy that is more sustainable, and education that is going to give more capabilities and encourage girls' leadership and participation. Because if we don't hear from them about what really is most affecting them, we are at risk that the investments are not targeted in the best way.
Thank you, Gabriella Buscher. Nick Nuttall, please.
Yeah, I'd love to do a fundraiser for the Earth Day network and say we desperately need money and this is the bank account number, but I won't do that.
Not today.
What I would say is that before I joined the Earth Day network, I was actually with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And we did a global survey with a Danish-based organization called Worldwide Views of citizens' views in just under 100 countries around the world. What did they think was needed for climate action as citizens? And yes, you had green energy, and you had, protecting forests and things like that. But the number one thing that came out was that citizens believe they need more education on this. Education, not just at the level of the schools and the universities, but also education in terms of training people for the kinds of green jobs that are needed in this global transition. There are shortages of some of the skill sets that are needed to deliver green energy, for example, and many, many other things. So I think the finance needs to not just go into the technologies that we need or the forests that we will need, but also into human skills that can take part in this transition and also protect themselves, as Gabriella said, in these difficult circumstances. So I think many government ministries and many of those with philanthropic funding should be looking at education in the round to finance this kind of change that we need among people.
Thank you. I know, Scott, you wanted to answer my question, but I'm actually going to move on to the second question and address it directly to you. When it comes to sustainable finance, should we encourage divestments or should we encourage investing, as in owning or influencing? What do you think?
Well, I think what I would say is that we need to look at two dimensions. One is that's being overlooked is who are the ones that's actually providing the capital, and are we looking at it from their perspective? It's very easy to look at it from the point of the NGOs, but we need to look at it from the point of the pension schemes, the insurance, and the institutional. The other side of it is that capital being wisely used? Because at the end of the day, if you want to make significant progress, you have to address the fundamental economics. So let's talk about the pension side. Just like in traditional retirement investments, you have different styles, emerging, international, and so forth, is not all impact investing falls within the similar types of characteristics. Some are going to be great impact, but zero return. Others are going to have asset base, securitized, and it's going to generate income. And it's going to be better aligned with, let's say, pension liability, for instance. So it's important to look at NGO projects in such a way that it aligns to the actual institutional requirements or the needs. We have to take that into consideration. The product innovation is not looking at what's available, but would they invest it and why would they invest it? Other piece that's important is making sure from a nomenclature, we don't bundle ESG with impact investing. Impact investing is a loose term. And when we're talking about that, it's not a negative filter that we're looking at. We're looking at new, fresh capital that could go into greenfield projects that's going to do exactly what you're talking about, women, projects, networks, and so forth. The other piece.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I need to interrupt you here, Scott, because we have a very tight schedule today. So I need to move over to Ingmar because you were putting your hand up. Thank you very much, Scott.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as Scott. I think we're going to see a lot of the investment in the future, not just because of moral reasons, because it's risky assets to have invested in fossil fuels. So I think we're going to see more and more of the investment, and that's great. But we must focus on where that money goes, because I don't see that all those money goes to climate action and climate impact. Most of the money goes to old business that is not fossil intense, like the banks and stuff. And we don't need more banks. We need climate actions. We need to de-invest and make sure the money goes in the right direction at a positive way. So we create something new, as many of the other speakers have told. So I think that's a very important question.
Thank you. Before I give Sandrine the final word here, I'd like to let Jill Cubitt from Our Kids Climate come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring the conversation down to kind of what individual people can do, because we work directly with parents. And I think, as parents or as people, we have the decisions that we're making in terms of how we consume energy, where our energy is coming from, and where our investments are. So I would just really encourage us all out there to really think about what we can do, not just because what we do actually reduces our own carbon footprints, but because what we do actually sends signals to other people that this is something that's really important. And those signals that will make changes kind of on the larger social perspective will help change and allow for businesses and for governments to be able to make kind of the big changes that we're talking about.
Thank you very much for Jill for that perspective. And the final word to Sandrine now.
Thank you so much for the final word. I want to build both on Jill and Scott's point very quickly, and that is that each person can influence this shift, and we're seeing it at different levels. So Jill is absolutely correct. Citizens need to start calling for their rights. What do they want their pension plans to invest in? What do they want their banks to invest in? And they can do that. They can stomp their feet and put their fist down and say, this is what I want. I want it to go into de-risked, non-stranded asset investments. Then the second point is, let's not forget that many of the banks are coming together and starting to call for this. We've got Carney in the United Kingdom at the Bank of England working with a series of other central banks that's saying, actually, the risk is in investing in fossil fuels, exactly as Ingmar has indicated. And we need to shift that risk. We need to count that risk. We need to start to look at externalities and ensure that all our investments are stress tested and that we de-risk actually the investments that are moving into low carbon, into green investments. I think there's a general movement in this direction. I think by working all together, citizens and policymakers and bankers and investors, impact investors and all asset owners, we can really shift the bar, but we need to both disinvest from stranded assets and reinvest into positive assets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandrine de Clèves. And you all be staying online for the chat afterwards with the viewers and listeners. It's now time for call to action. And it's important that we stick and stay and vote for the campaigns that we have on We Don't Have Time platform. We have global campaigns that we're now going to highlight a few for you. So with all of us collectively supporting these, we can really move faster ahead. So let's view some of the campaigns.
Hi, I'm Christina, and I'd love you to join my campaign to show Lego some climate love. Most of you have probably stepped on one of these at some point in your life. Having children, they're ubiquitous, and Lego is big business. I'm a financial translator for Swedish corporates. What I'm really passionate about is the world around me. I love it, and I want it to stay as beautiful as it was when I grew up for my children and my grandchildren. I'm sure you agree with me about that. Now, what Lego has done that's really special is that they've set themselves quite stringent targets to start with, and they've actually beaten their own targets. So their aim was to go 100% renewable energy, but they've done it 3 years ahead of their own schedule. And that's something I think deserves some climate love. Kids have learned strategy, planning, creativity, collaboration from using these little guys that are not ready-made. And that's something that I really support in itself. But they're made of plastic, aren't they? And they're made on a massive scale. Lego is America's largest toy manufacturer. So the fact that they've actually taken the lead on going renewable sends a massive signal both to consumers all around the world. Renewable is the way forward, and it's doable. What I also really like about Lego is the way they look at children not as a potential customer to be manipulated, but as a source of inspiration. And they're bringing out toys that are aimed at helping children care about environmental and social issues. I think that's really the way forward, and together we can do this, and I'm so grateful for We Don't Have Time. So please go to wedon'thavetime.org and agree to my campaign and send Lego some climate love that'll help them keep up the great work they're doing. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Joakim Jansson at klimatbytet.se, or the climate transfer. The last couple of years I've been thinking quite a lot regarding climate and how we need to transform society to be able to cope in the future. I've been thinking a lot about also that I believe that the money is the key to solving this issue. If we can readdress the money towards more climate conscious companies and more climate conscious funds and savings, I think we're on to something. And this is where this thing kicks off. It was a few weeks ago when I woke up and I felt like, yeah, finally, I think I have it. I think I have a solution that at least could, to a part, contribute to this change in the financial system. And this is where you come in, actually. So what we are trying to do is to make it easy for everyone to have their savings in the pension system and to redirect them, to change them into more climate conscious funds. So we have a site where you can see how much money has been transferred and also make it easy for you to see all the steps you need to take to be able to do this. You have a movie that facilitates, and also how you can share this with friends and family and colleagues and around the world. To be able to do this, we needed what actually the pension agency launched a few weeks ago, when they launched a filter to make it easy to filter out what is climate conscious funds.
With us here we have Johannes Kullberg, who has started a campaign boycotting Brazilian produce. Hello, Johannes Kullberg, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
So please tell us, why did you start a campaign to boycott Brazilian produce?
Well, I'm the founder and CEO of a small natural organic grocery chain, and I got super frustrated with the behavior of Mr. Bolsonaro and Brazil, the Brazilian government in general, where they increase the use of pesticides while also increasing the deforestation of the Brazilian rainforest. And I said, like, somebody's got to do something, and my choice was to boycott all of the Brazilian products from my stores, and in hope to inspire others to follow.
And how has the response been so far?
It's been amazing from customers and both in Sweden and mainly in Brazil. There's been several articles written, and one of them was shared in Brazil with more than 300,000 shares on Facebook. And I've become friends with I don't know how many Brazilian people now, so it's a good thing.
And I also understand that since the campaign reached a certain level, the Brazilian authorities were notified, and you actually got a response from the Brazilian embassy. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yes, I did. I got an open letter that said that I was being unfair to Brazil, since they are only the fifth worst user of pesticides in the world, and not the worst. So they thought I was being unfair. And also that almost 200 new pesticides that have been approved by Bolsonaro might not be used. So they also thought that was a bit unfair that I said that the boycott. And I think that's pretty strong.
So, Johannes, what will happen next?
Well, I wrote a response that we will continue the boycott, and I have been in continuous talks with the other grocery chains and also with major consumer groups and universities. And I think this will become this is a bottom-up movement, where I hope that the customers will vote with their knives and forks and say we don't buy Brazilian products. And then in the end, companies will need to stop selling the products because the customers won't buy them.
Well, thank you very much, Johannes Kullberg, for your important work.
Thank you.
These are great campaigns, aren't they, huh? It's so important that we focus on supporting them. So if you haven't yet downloaded the We Don't Have Time app, please do that and send climate love to these campaigns and to other campaigns. Because we do know that the power rests in the many, right? We now have a renowned person who will join us for his analysis. His name is Mark Buckley. According to him, the world's biggest problem is also the world's biggest solution. Mark Buckley is based in Switzerland. He is part of the World Economic Forum Expert Network. Mark, the next 5 minutes are yours. Okay, there was a little bit of a hiccup in the connection with Mark here, so we'll have to move on to the next step of the show instead. The theme of the show is sustainable finance for all it's worth, as I mentioned earlier. But what exactly does that mean? With us today, we have experts that will talk about this. We have with us Daniel Barr. Daniel Barr is the General Secretary of the Swedish Pensions Funds. Here we go. Hello, Daniel. Glad to have you with us. We also have Joachim Jansson from Klimatbytet that was just previously showing his campaign. Hello, Joachim. You're here somewhere. And we also have Maria Mähl. She's partner and head of Nordics at Arabesque. Hello, Maria. She'll be with us here any second, I hope. Tanya Swidler, I see you already. Tanya Swidler is Director of ESG Solutions of Morningstar. Hello, Tanya. And there's Maria too from Arabesque. And Peter Jansen, who will be co-hosting this show. Peter is with us from Alicante, Spain. And Peter is Forbes Leadership Coach. And he will, as I said, co-host the end of this panel discussion. Daniel Barr, you are, of course, familiar with Klimatbytet. And in this campaign, Joachim has sort of, in a way, helped you launch the transition of funds that you have made possible at the Swedish Pensions Authority. So what do you have to say in response to his campaign?
Well, we run the largest fund platform here in Sweden. It's a part of the Pillar 1 pension system here. And we invest about 1,300 billion krona in funds. So we are by large the largest fund platform in the country. We had an assignment from the government to promote ESG investment, and we launched a functionality that people can log into our website and pick funds that do not invest in certain areas or have a low carbon footprint or a high ESG value. And we have had a quite massive response to that, a positive response. We launched that a couple of months ago, and several other fund platforms in Sweden, private platforms, is going in the same direction, inspired by what we've done. And Joachim's initiative is, of course, welcome for us. It's always good to have positive feedback from our customers, and I think it's one of several feedbacks that we had from our customers. We look very positive in his initiative.
Thank you very much. Joachim Jansson, why did you launch Klimatbytet, and how do you react to what Daniel Barr is saying here?
Yeah, the background is that I've been thinking about what could I do as a person, as an individual. And I've been, of course, change my life as a private person, but I start figuring out what could I do like that could scale, what could I do that actually could have a larger impact. And I've been trying to follow the thesis for the money and see what could I do, what could I impact out there so we could impact the money. Because if you could impact the money and get the money to flow in a more climate conscious way, I believe that the rest will follow. Then we will have trickle down effects and we will have the whole system starting to change. And what happened was that a few weeks ago, I think it was April 4th, Daniel, when you launched this new service, I saw a tweet and I went into pensionsmyndigheten.se, pensions agent's site, and it just took me 10 minutes to switch. First, I was really upset, to be honest, because I didn't have any clue that I was investing in fossil fuels. I didn't have any clue that I was also investing in a lot of other things like weapons and porn and stuff like that, which I had no clue about. So I just started to read a bit about it. I tried then to switch over to other funds, and that was really easy, which I was happy about. And then I woke up next morning, and I had like 150 pulse, and I woke up, went down in the basement, the same basement where I am right now. And I was trying this idea out in a Facebook group and told them, let's try to divest and start investing in more climate conscious funds instead. And it just took a few hours, and then like 2, 3, 4 million Swedish crowns is already switched and transferred into better funds. And that's where I kind of figured out that this idea could scale. So if I have a platform, a site, and a lot of people pushing it, that could be the beginning of a movement and a change and transformation movement. And it is.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. But are you planning on launching this transition even more? Because it's been sort of low key so far from your side.
We're not planning to have any large marketing campaign, but we certainly will have press activities and market it on our website in our ordinary work. We probably also will collect some data of how frequent this is used and how it's used, and publish different kinds of analysis around this to inform.
So why are you not making a bigger fuss, a bigger sort of launch about this? Because this is pretty remarkable.
I think it's pretty remarkable. I think it's not often that the government is in the forefront in this type of area, but this is the case here. Well, we are a public authority, and we work for our customers. We don't have a commercial interest in this. We like to enable our customers to make informed choices, also in the ESG dimension. That's why we're doing it. And I don't think we can defend actually to spend a lot of marketing money on this.
Well, I think this, thanks to Joachim's campaign, the word is spreading even faster. And Joachim, you've stated that if a modest 1% of all Swedes put 10 minutes into changing their pension funds, an amount of 18 billion US dollars could be added to more climate-friendly, climate-active savings, smart retirement savings. That's a lot of money. So 10 minutes of 1% of the Swedes would generate this much money. Well, thank you. I'd like to move on to Maria Mel from Arabesque. Maria, you have in Arabesque created the first analytics search engine that enables us to see how companies are working with the UN sustainability goals. And why do you do this work? And what effects have you seen from it so far?
Thank you. Yes, so we're an asset manager, but we're also a sustainability data analytics company. And for us, it's very important to help mainstream sustainability and sustainable investment, that everyone can have the ability to see what these companies, how they work and how they're affecting the world, both positively, but also with a negative impact. And looking at individual companies, we all know that we also can have an effect in helping them to change and help them on a positive trajectory. So what we've seen, similar to what we actually heard here earlier, is that a lot of people, companies and institutions that own, for instance, mutual funds or stocks, might not necessarily know what their companies are involved in or how their revenues are generated, or what activities they're involved in. So this creates a transparency that is very important when it comes to financial services. But if we want to use sustainable finance as a tool to help companies become more sustainable, we need to work on initiatives such as our S-ray, that we call it. It's a play on sustainability and X-ray because it's shining a light under the hood of the companies. And the previous one that we heard from Sweden. And these initiatives are very important to really show the positive and the negative impact of companies.
So how can companies and even regular people use your search engine and leverage their investments? Is it easy to access?
Well, traditionally, this was very hard to do. You had to have a set of analysts that would call the company, go and visit them and read up on reports. But we wanted to make this a little easier. So with the help of machine learning and big data, we collect data about the company similar to what you would do with regular analysts, but then we also add on top of that news that are out there, some social media sentiment. And we then built an online tool that everyone can use on our website, which is arabesque.com.
So it's open source, it's free to use.
Exactly. And that's very important because we have to remember that sustainable finance for a very long time were only for a part of society, for the ones who had a lot of money and could choose to invest in products that were given just as good returns as traditional ones. And we know today that sustainable financial products can generate as much, if not more, risk-adjusted return
Absolutely.
for traditional ones. So this is our attribution to giving everyone a tool. No matter how much money you have to invest, you should be able to find out how sustainable the companies that you want to invest in.
And Maria, do you have a company that you would like to give climate love to on the platform?
I do, and it's a former oil company. And remember what I said in the beginning, it's important to show and demonstrate and help nudge companies in the way to become more sustainable. And this is a Neste oil company who now started out as a traditional oil company and are now really made some big stride towards becoming more sustainable.
Thank you very, very much, Maria Mel from Arabesque. Tanya Swidler, Director of ESG Solutions for Morningstar. I'd like to address another question to you. You've analyzed the sustainability of investment funds. How do you see investors accepting these metrics? And how have they been used? Is there an impact?
Of course. Hello, everyone. For us at Morningstar, our very mission is to deliver the best outcomes for the end investor. And several years ago, we realized that investors were missing metrics related to sustainability. And we wanted to provide more transparency around how different funds select companies. And we wanted to make sure that investors are able to understand how effectively are companies mitigating their material ESG risks. So since then, we've seen a tremendous amount of positive impact that those metrics have been providing. The ratings we've created are intentionally quite simple. They're 1 to 5 globes. And because of that simplicity, it actually helps to eliminate some of those complexities that Maria just spoke about. Since sustainable investment is a very complex space and it does encompass many different topics. So creating this baseline really helps to provide more transparency to investors. And as a result, they're actually able to start embedding sustainability into their investment decisions. So we have started seeing that investors are increasingly looking out for funds that have very strong ESG metrics and start moving away the capital from funds that hold companies that only invest into poor ESG performers.
Well, thank you. And last year, Tanya, you added a climate risk analysis. How has that been received? Could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Of course. So climate change is really the leading factor in sustainable investing. And because clients are increasingly looking for ways to mitigate climate risk, we have launched a set of metrics that helps clients understand how much climate risk companies carry in their products, services, and operations. Help understand how much exposure those companies have to fossil fuels, and also help understand how exposed are those companies to renewable energy solutions. And alongside those climate-related metrics, we've provided a low-carbon designation, which helps investors easily identify funds that are best prepared to a transition to low-carbon economy. So those funds tend to have lower level of carbon risk, as well as lower level of fossil fuel involvement. And the Swedish pension agency actually started providing low-carbon as a way for investors to easily identify those funds on the platform, thereby directing capital towards better climate-related investments, which is, of course, a very fantastic development.
Wonderful. So there's some collaboration here between the panelists. That's excellent. So I'm now handing over to Peter Jansen, Forbes coach. The floor is yours now, Peter. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And it's wonderful to be here with all of you. I believe that everything rises and falls on the shoulders of leadership. And leadership is all about seeing more and seeing more before the rest. We call this a vision. So this is what I'd like to be focusing on today. So my first question is for you, Joachim. Considering your background is in digital transformation rather than climate, I'm very interested in how your vision came to you and where you're seeing it. Where do you want it to go in the future? And I want you to think big here because, you know, you've got a big audience.
Yeah, always think big and start small and act now, right? No, but where did it come from? I mean, it ticks in so many boxes for me, this klimatbyte, the climate transfer. It's about digitalization, it's about transparency, it's about data, it's about sustainability, it's about change, it's about transformation, all of these things that I'm interested in on a personal level. And as a professional, I work with large-scale change, transformation. And for me, this is all about large-scale change. And I think what I could maybe add some skills and expertise into is how to drive this change, how to get people aboard, how to get people to really start thinking as boring as your pension, for instance. So, and from that, I have then derived the idea, tested it as I talked about before, and I mean, it took us 5 days, and now we're up to 100 million Swedish crowns directed into more climate conscious funds. So that's actually where it all comes from.
I'm really hoping to see this coming from grassroots, develop into a global movement, Joachim. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Now, my next question is for you, Daniel. Taking policy aside, and of course, the fact that you are in a governmental institution, I'd like to think global with you today. Where do you see your vision and your work rolling out into the rest of the world? How do you see that happening? And what sort of leadership do you see emerging from this?
Well, being a Swedish government organization, knowing that ESG investment is quite fragmented business, Sweden different from other countries, even in the Scandinavian region. I think what will happen in the near future, hopefully, is that our initiative will spread to other private institutions and other private platforms. And we're actually seeing a couple of large Swedish private platforms that have been inspired and launched new ESG initiatives quite recently. And I think maybe the word could be spread outside Sweden in the second step, but we haven't thought about that much yet.
Well, my challenge to you is help us think about that. Help us think about how to make that happen.
Of course, any suggestions are welcome in this direction, of course. But this is not our main focus area. The focus area is pension for the public in Sweden. This is not this is a tiny bit of the operation, but it's an important one, of course.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Daniel. And my next question is for Maria. Maria, artificial intelligence is playing an increasingly large part in finance today. What is your vision of how AI-driven analytics will change investor decision-making processes to consider investments in ESG?
Great question. Thanks, Peter. What's interesting is that we had the rise of sustainable finance over the past couple of years, and it's happening simultaneously as the big data machine learning wave is all coming over us. And I would say that as a sustainable finance, we need the machine learning to understand the data that is out there. So all the new data sources, the kind of data that we couldn't use before into our investment processes. that I mentioned earlier. Traditionally, we had analysts reading up on companies. Now we can get news data, we can get social media sentiment, events, and all of that will help us to better understand and inform our decisions. And it also impacts in the way that there's no way to hide, because this machine learning, AI that you mentioned, and the big data will help us to find the information in a completely different way. So ESG is really thriving on the quality of data and transparency. Those are the things that you need to make better decisions to create these metrics. And if we didn't have them, we would be stuck in sustainable finance. But thanks to the rise of vast amounts of data that are happening right now that we didn't have access to, we're now being able to take better decisions. And also, to be quite honest, there's no way to hide today when everyone is equipped with a cell phone in their hands, which the whole population of the globe is increasingly being. So this is a great step for finance. But then again, I'm not saying that financial analysts will be replaced by robots. I'm just saying that this is a great complement to truly design better metrics. And that's up to us in finance to work with the specialists in climate change and, for instance, in any other sustainability areas. We talked about this earlier. We're just as much as we're an asset manager and a data analytics firm, we're a fintech company. We work very closely with NGOs and bilateral organizations together, because working on sustainable development, you need to do as a team with the large organizations out there in the world to get a better holistic view on how companies and organizations are impacting the environment and social issues.
Thank you so much, Maria. Well, that was a very complete answer, and it got everything I was asking for.
No challenge?
Well, we'll talk later, and I bet you'll challenge me tremendously. Okay, and finally, Tanya, now that S&P Dow Jones have launched their S&P 500 ESG index, this has taken ESG investment into the mainstream. How do you and the rest of Morningstar's leadership see ESG investments in the world scene? That's my first part.
Okay, well, sustainability is really a mega trend that is changing the way companies and investors think about their success. So it's great to see this development from S&P, but also many mainstream providers have been building out a full suite of ESG indices, including us at Morningstar. We've developed sustainability, low carbon risk, as well as impact indices that are increasingly being used as a base for financial products. So we have several ETFs that are out there with impact shares that focus on women's empowerment, minority empowerment, as well as sustainable development goals, because indexes are actually a great way to harness the power of financial markets to generate positive change. And there is a strong trend towards passive investing. And obviously, indices are predominantly used as a base for passive product creation. And the trend towards passive is driven by a very simple financial decision, because active management is just becoming prohibitively expensive. Now, the trend towards sustainability, of course, it's something that's getting me out of bed every morning. We see so much more adoption in across Europe. Of course, Scandinavia is leading the way, but the continental Europe is catching on, and we see this in regulation. And of course, in the US, we start seeing so much more adoption related to ESG investing. And actually, we see that in the US, being an ESG fund has actually been the sixth most important driver of asset flows. And in Europe, it actually has been the #1 driving factor. And we see much more transparency from asset managers with regards to how they speak about sustainability. So they start displaying sustainability ratings, they start ESG reporting onto the end investor. And of course, platforms start surfacing sustainability and carbon metrics, thereby bringing that ESG component into the equation, and providing transparency of information, of course, helps drive investor decisions much more meaningfully.
This makes perfect sense. And it's incredible how this has actually shifted in the past few years, hasn't it? It really is.
It's great.
It's amazing. So talking about leadership, at the end of the day, I am a leadership coach, right? So talking about leadership, I'd like to understand more profoundly what shifts in leadership you believe will be necessary to create a conscious change towards ESG investment.
Absolutely. Well, I think there are several components to this. First of all, it certainly helps when you've got credible leadership. And Daniel just spoke about the fact that the Swedish government had encouraged ESG and low carbon investing. And it certainly helps when you got that. I live in New York, which is part of the United States. We don't necessarily have the same leadership. But I think what could be done, which is really important, is that investors need to understand that finance can be a great engine of progress and great engine of impact. And harnessing the power of finance to drive that positive change is really the type of leadership that could be in place from pension funds, which we already start seeing happening in Europe, in the United States, in Asia, making major efforts on governance and climate-related investing. So a lot of pension funds can drive that, and that's really their leadership. Then they can provide more transparency related to ESG. They can invest into companies that better balance their natural, financial, and environmental capital in decision making. And then, of course, it's the leadership from the end investor, from my mom, who is an English teacher. And so with her pension fund decisions, with a selection of funds that invest into companies that are more sustainable and companies that really care about managing their climate risks, they can provide that everyday leadership, and they can send a strong signal to companies that sustainability is really part of their success. It's at the heart of their success. So that's what we need to do as investors.
So we all form part of this, and our decisions need to be more conscious, and we need to lead ourselves through this as well. It's important.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you very much. And well, with this, Katarina, back to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I have one final question to all of you. Is there anything you'd like to add to what you just said about solutions, what you could do as a private person or as a company? And also, of course, in addition, we need to be able to send, we are able to send climate love warnings and also launch campaigns on the We Don't Have Time app. But is there anything you'd like to add, any good advice for people, viewers listening or viewing this?
If I may start, my comment would be, I think it was a great comment, that we all can make a difference today. And where there are not information to be had, maybe about your funds, your pensions, you have to ask. You have to ask your financial advisor, what's in this fund? What kind of companies am I owning? But also asking, what kind of climate impact do they have? Even if they can't answer today, that will start a journey and a chain reaction within that company to find out those answers. So we have a big journey to do in the financial services to help provide that kind of information, but it will not come unless someone's asking for it, and that's up to all of us.
Thank you very much, Maria Mel. Anybody else would like to add something?
I could build on that, what Maria is saying. Yeah, we are all leaders, we're all self-leaders. So if we together see that we can, as consumers, have the power to change, we will have the power to make a change. And when we do that, so please do the climate transfer. Go in and switch your funds, ask your financial advisors, your banks, and so on and so forth. And then they need to step up to the plate to actually have all the knowledge about what is climate conscious, and all the people working towards clients in banks, in funds and everything, they need to know this and be able to answer this. So I think that's really important. One challenge, I think, for the industry and also maybe also to the pensions agency could be that instead of opting out of what is bad, let us start as a default with what is good. And if you would like to opt in to something like fossils or what is bad for the climate, or if you would like to opt in to have savings in nuclear weapons or so on and so forth, let's do that. Now you have to opt out of it, and I think that's a bit strange.
Thank you very much, Joachim Jansson. And Thank you all for participating in this panel and sharing your expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now all of our viewers and listeners, we have gotten all these expertise advice. We have gotten insights about the tools. Please use them. If you haven't yet downloaded the app, the We Don't Have Time app, please do so and support the campaigns we have on the app and start your own, of course, if you want to. And let's please take an opportunity very soon to interact with our expert guests on the chat. Do remember, we don't have time to wait, but we still do have time to act. Thank you, all of you, for listening and viewing this show, and thank you for all the guests that have been participating.